You ever notice that as you get a bit older, you want things that are in your life that have lasting value? It's one thing to furnish your house with early Goodwill stylings when you're 20 and just starting out, and quite another thing when you find yourself at 50 plus, still living with the same starter living room set you had 20 years ago. Our perspective changes, and what we value as we age are things that last, things that hold their value, things that we can pass on to our kids and grandkids. Bill Hennessy, and I help Christians in or near retirement navigate the chaos, change, and confusion of their new seasons so they can experience more fulfillment, freedom, and friendship. Today, we'll hear from an old friend of mine, Dave Christensen, about how he discovered a lot about what matters, and I'll let him tell his story.
So in the early 2000s, I went on a mission trip through our church and we went to Cape Town, South Africa. My building skills are less than desired. You probably want me on the other side of the hammer. I went anyway. I had a friend tell me that, it'll change your life and expand your horizons within the kingdom. So I did. And when I got down there, I met you. And you had opened the door to the cops locally. So you had told me that you had tried to build a rapport with the police, but they were closed minded, didn't want to do it because police don't trust the public sometimes just because the nature of the job. I came along, and in my spare time, I met with the head of the Tableview police station, Yaki von Listenborg. He was a colonel in their South African police service. And it started out friendly. We went to lunch. We had a good time. We shared stories. And then I asked him, is it okay if we took a couple of names from the police and passed them on to, parishioners of the local church just to pray for them and maybe have some fellowship, the ones that wanted to? And he said, not a problem. And I believe that was because when I was a police officer, we had an instant rapport. And so that opened the door to the ministry that God gave us locally. So while I was there, I met a ton of people from the police. And one of them was a man named Leslie Chillers. He was a sergeant in their police department. And because of traditions that are outside the United States, they had what was called it was basically a bar with pool tables and whatnot. And he was the barman and he mixed drinks when they were off duty. And this was their recreation time and their social time. So being in that environment, I sat around and we swapped stories and whatnot and became good friends. 2 weeks came up and we went back to the United States, went back to work. And then not too long after we came back to the States, I learned that Leslie had been killed in the line of duty. He was shot while on a call by a gang member. And one of the things that disturbed me was that he wasn't wearing body armor or a ballistic vest. So, out of concern for fellow officers, I had sent some used ballistic vests that I collected from my police department. And this started a dialogue with the police down there. Basically, they couldn't believe that someone or anyone would be kind to them on purpose without a hook. Because usually, when people are kind of buttering you up in the profession, they want something and want to get out of a ticket. They want you to do some kind of favor because you're in a position of authority and whatnot. And so it left them a little dumbfounded. Well, as I was just doing life, and I had a dream, and the dream basically said that you are to start a ministry for cops. And I was a little resistant with it because I was attending my church. I sung in the choir. I went to Sunday school. I worked in the youth department for my kids and whatnot. And I figured that was enough, right? Well, it wasn't, because I had a few more dreams and God was very persistent. He's a gentleman, and he was knocking on my door and he's saying, I want to use you for my kingdom. But I was too caught up in my daily routine to see that. So eventually I woke up, and what we did was we started Adopt a Cop. Adopt a Cop was local. I reached out to some police departments locally, and they were able to say, yes, we don't mind the public praying for us. Most of them, they're not believers. But because it was another police officer asking, a little bit more than normal, they didn't mind. We had some resistance, but not too much. So we started collecting signature cards we'd send to the individual officers that gave us permission to reach out to them at the local level. And pretty soon it expanded. Pastor of our church was very open to it, and he gave us permission to use the church as a 501(c). So as the ministry grew locally, so did our influence. But then the compass started pointing toward Africa again. And I had sent another batch of ballistic vests to the police department, and it was a positive response, very positive. Then I was still fighting within myself of this is what God wanted me to do, because who am I, right? So I went, we went on a Wednesday night to see a local evangelist, and he called me out of the crowd and he said, I see you running in airports and going to minister uh, in Africa. And he said, God is telling me to tell you that he is going to give you a country if you will be obedient. Well, eventually I get it because my spiritual thick head. Uh, so I was obedient. And all of a sudden, it was like the floodgates opened. There was people that he brought to us that he wanted to be involved in the ministry. Some famous people, some not so famous people, other cops that are Christians. Pretty soon, it boiled to the point where I was sent over to Cape Town on my own because I had another dream and God spoke to me and he said, I want you to go to Africa. And I'm not going to tell you yet, but once you get there, I'll reveal what, I want you to do. And it's funny because my first wife had the same dream. We were both in sync on that. So it was just confirmed because again, sometimes I'm thick-headed. So we started this. So I got in touch with you and I came over to the theological seminary and I rented a phone and I sat in my dorm. And all of a sudden, the phone started blowing up with church people, even cops, because they heard that there was an American police officer who was interested in hearing what they have to say, helping them out. So I met with several church leaders, parishioners, and whatnot. So that's kind of set the foundation of what God wanted us to do in Cape Town.
Hmm.
Fast forward, we put a team together of 12 people. There was another police officer, Gillinger, and his wife. And also, we had a couple, the Hewletts from Eastern Washington, who I believe in the Tri Cities, and they came along. And one of Janet Hewlett was the one who actually started Adopt a Cop over on the east side of our state. So
Hmm.
we were kind of modeled what we were doing after what she had started. So we get over there and we were welcomed. It was crazy because we had set up some classroom time, and we also would teach, law enforcement tactics and whatnot. And we had police and security people come in to listen. But we also let them know that we were Christians and that even though we were talking about secular things in the trade of law enforcement, that we would be asking them if they wanted to listen to the message of salvation. But they
Hmm.
didn't have to participate. I mean, it was totally voluntary, and they understood that. There was one guy that was a little persistent. He was a little kind of full of himself, and he challenged us in what we were trying to do, but at the same time, he was still sitting in his seat. So at a break, I told him at one point that he didn't need to be here. This was totally voluntary. And I just mentioned that I said, you're kind of disrupting what we're trying to do. So if you don't want to be here, you can leave. And well, I think that challenged him because he stayed. And the first break, when we gave the call for salvation, he was the first one to run up.
And still
And
believer
he was
today.
our first, and he's still a believer today. And he was our biggest advocate when we first started in Cape Town. And again, yes, today, many years later, 20 years, I think it has been, that he's still serving the Lord. Him and his wife are, believers, and we still keep in touch and whatnot. So I made a lot of friends over there, and we were able to share the gospel in ways that traditionally with churches and stuff, it couldn't reach them because police officers there were considered the enemy because of apartheid. And most of the officers that we dealt with were white, and there were some colored and black people that were police officers slowly integrating into that system because of the change of government from apartheid to what they have now. So we had one officer who actually capsulized their treatment in that country. And he said this, he said, a ballistic vest can protect the body, but it doesn't protect the mind. And the things that we see, it's not hard to erase. It's very hard to erase. In fact, sometimes you just have to live with it, just like I do. I have PTSD, and I still live with some of the things that I've seen over my career. But he said this also. He said, the public believes that we're just a machine, that we're not a person, that we're just a, a component of the system, that we come out, we deal with the problem, we deal with people, we make an arrest if we have to, but we're just a thing. We're a functioning thing that doesn't have a human face to it. And that's the thing that most law enforcement officers, they struggle with. Well, he capsulized it what it was, but at the same time, we also, through yourself and many people, said, you know what? There's an alternative to this. Jesus Christ can come into your life, wear it away. You'll have eternal life. You'll have peace. And then you can learn what God can replace because of the hurt. And a lot of people in law enforcement, they have broken marriages, one of the highest professions of divorce, at least in the United States. And I've talked to several officers around the world in democratic countries, and they say the same thing. Their way they do law enforcement is the same. It's just how they get there is different, just because of a language. And so through all our travels and all the things that we did, many people came to the Lord. And it was because God opened the door, and because eventually I was obedient to his calling. And I think somebody told me, because I was trying to make sense of it all sometimes, and he said, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called.
Hmm.
And I really believe that now, years later, because I'm retired. I retired in 2018, and I had a great career, and now I'm moving on to retirement. And all those folks that we left back, the ministry lasted 4 years, and then it was done. It dried up, doors were closed. I tried to push it a little bit and it wouldn't happen because God was done with that chapter of my life and other people's lives. But it's interesting because everything that we do impacts another person throughout our day, especially in law enforcement.
Hmm.
If you have an officer that is content and loved and has a good family base, and is grounded in the Word of God, he is going to be not Superman, but he is going to be able to withstand the storms that come to a law enforcement officer every day. It's very, very challenging. It's a very hard job. But again, on the other side, it's very rewarding. So
Hmm.
I have no regrets. I have no regrets of the 35 years that I put in. But also, what gives me hope is that in retirement, now I have grandkids. Now I'm going to chase them around and love on them and love on people and do something else besides what I did for a career. And as we build up our nest egg here on earth, I'm also building my nest egg in heaven.
There's so many
So
things, Dave, that are running
when,
through my head. I've got to break in for a second here because I don't want to make the
sure, go ahead.
transition fully into retirement just yet. Because you mentioned the Hewletts, and they were retirement age when they came to Cape Town. They were already
Yes.
past retirement age, and they'd been doing this adopt a cop for a little while, and they had found their hope and their purpose and meaning in that. And then they were able to
Hmm.
express it through a trip with someone who opened a door for them, and that was you. And then I was able to open the door for you. And so there's kind of like this chain that was working. And so the Hewletts got to fulfill
Yeah.
a call on their lives because of knowing you. You got to fulfill a call of God on your life because we had met, but we also met practical needs. And I want to talk about that just real briefly because you mentioned the ballistic vests. And by the time we got back with that crew of police officers like Gil Langer, and did all that training, we had over 100 vests that had been donated to go down to South Africa, and we were able to distribute those during that training that you were talking about. And that practical gesture, I think, gave you the stage to talk about faith. What would you say about that?
Absolutely, because I had a I had a genuine love for officers anywhere in the world because I can empathize and sympathize with what the struggles that they go through. That was a tool that God had used to, for me anyway. I felt bad for the guy that was killed in the line of duty. He was a nice man, and he was young, and he had so many promising things in the future. So getting those vests down there was a tangible way that I could help them because I wasn't physically there.
Yeah, and I think the practical side of things is that we can give a message with our mouths, but sometimes we can give a message with what we bring in our hands. And I think that that's what was going on. I also wanted to paint the picture of what happened during that training when you guys did tactical training inside a theological seminary's grounds. What was it like to go over the building security or securing a building and that type of thing? How was it working with those guys? Had they been through that kind of training in a situation like that before?
Their standard of training was a little bit below what the US level was for an average police department. We also had interestingly enough, in South Africa, a lot of those guys were in the army, South African army, and then transitioned because they're a national police force, kind of like Canada has the Mounties. And they were able to tell me through, in different conversations that, yeah, we have SWAT training. We're really good at weapons and things like that in the trade. So what we were doing was just giving them a rudimentary perspective, another way of approaching their job. And we also learned a lot from them, how they do stuff. They put me on a ride along. They rolled out the red carpet for me. They got a helicopter to land in their yard because there everything is, it almost looks like a prison. They got barbed wire and all that kind of stuff because of the past of the country. So I was elated. I didn't expect it, but again, God showed favor. So they called in a helicopter for me, and they gave me this tour of Cape Town and the harbor and the surrounding areas, and it was beautiful country. And then at the same time, they're also available for police calls. Well, they got a call of a house break-in. We called it a burglary. They call it a house break-in. And uh, as we're flying to the area to give aerial support to the officers on the ground, they identified the suspects, and they were running through out of a neighborhood into kind of a brushy area, and they were able to take them into custody. One guy got away, and so we landed in the school soccer field, and they transferred me to a vehicle, and I continued my ride along with them. Well, they were still looking for the one guy, the one bad guy that got away. Well, they got away into a vehicle, but it was a Chevy. The kind of cars they have down there, that Chevy stood out, and I knew exactly what it was from the air. I spotted it. They made a traffic stop on the vehicle, and I was to stay in the vehicle, but I couldn't. I just had to get out because it was kind of hot. As I'm standing around watching them do their job, the guy gets up and he runs. So me and another South African police officer, I just kind of jumped in and helped handcuff the guy, handed him over. And you pick it up from there. When I got back from the ride along,
It was hilarious because Dave comes back and he looks at me and he says, "Bill, I got to make a citizen's arrest." I looked at him and said, "Dave, you're not a citizen." And he says, "Oh, I'm in an alien's arrest. Want to see my antenna?" Some things you just can't make up.
no, some things you just can't unsee. So yeah, but it was very, I mean, it was very educational, but I think what they were doing was saying thank you for what you're doing for us in their own way. And again, we didn't have 100% cooperation from all of the officers, but I went in with no expectation.
Mhm.
God was running the show. He knew exactly what was going to happen behind that curtain. We just got up every morning with great expectation that God was going to move in a miraculous and powerful way. I mean, he's the creator of the universe, you know. He's not bound by what we do. Uh, but he showed up in a big way. So a lot of people got saved, a lot of lives were changed, and we were just grateful to be a part of it.
Let me interject again now, because you talked about a 35-year law enforcement career. You talked about being retired for a few years and shifting gears, but you also talked about God using you and putting a call of God on your life and all these miracles that happened to get you to Cape Town multiple times. And now, looking forward, how are you going to take all that you've ever been and put it into retirement to make that meaningful and purposeful?
Well, especially in law enforcement, a lot of cops have problems basically winding down, putting away the job. There are certain things that stick with you, like, you're a trained observer. I always sit in a restaurant with my back to the wall all the time. Some of those, some don't die after a while when you leave. So I'll be real with you. When I retired, there was a knot in the back of my neck that was always there. I couldn't pray it away. I couldn't massage it away. It was just there. It was part of the job. Once I got out of that job and did something else, that I felt a freedom. It was like a cleansing breath after a good workout. And I just felt free. Freedom from the oppression of the job, freedom of the administration that you worked with, because a lot of times the stress came within the department, not with the people that you dealt with. It was just because it was government, and government wants results, and they don't, they individually they care for you, but corporately they're looking out for the interests of the city or county or state, which you're working for. So after I put that aside and I learned to not be so, married to that job, because I used to say this, he says, I'm a cop, but it's not who I am, it's what I do. Well, a lot of times it is part of your image because you live it 24 hours a day. Sometimes you just can't. When I was in detectives, you wore your cases home. You
Mhm.
thought about them all the time. I'd be worshiping, excuse me, I'd be worshiping on in the choir, singing worship songs. But at the same time, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking about that murder case that I got waiting for me the next day, Monday morning. So when I walked away, that was the best part of my life. So then you put the things in the past, just like God tells you to do, right? Looking forward, I found so many things that I could do with my time. I could volunteer. I could work in a law enforcement related job because that's where, that pays pretty good. So I did that for a while, worked for a courthouse. And then now I'm working for a traffic control company. It's cop work, but not you're not a cop. But it still provides an income because the way they have it set up is that law enforcement and firefighters in this state can retire at the age of 53 or the equivalent of years served. And they recognize this because the job is so stressful. So
Mhm.
I was 56 when I walked away, and I was a little bit older than that. And but from 56 on, and now I'm 63, I've learned to just enjoy every minute of the day, especially my grandkids and my family. And I'm free to move about the country, as they say, uh, knowing that I don't have to go back to that world, that God has something really, really cool for me out there. And I've seen microscopic evidence of God pointing me in another direction. But right now, I'm just living day to day, enjoying sleeping in and working part time.
So let's talk about the legacy you want to leave your grandkids because you've mentioned them a couple of times. What do you want to put into their lives that they carry with them the rest of their lives, even long after you are gone? What is it that you want them to learn from you that would really make a difference in their lives?
If you took a telescope and extended, it was one of those collapsible ones, and imagine you opening it up and looking through the looking glass, and you can see far away. What I want them to realize is that the legacy that I had, I passed on to my kids, my boys. Now my boy is passing his legacy on to his children. and so forth and so on. And what I want to leave with them is that God first in your life, and He will bless you, and you will be rewarded in this life and also when you go home.
Dave, I think it's a wonderful story, and I love what God's been doing in your life. I love the healing that's taken place after years and years of service. I love the fact that God has given you hope in the future. And, because you are still a young guy, you've got a lot of years left in retirement. So your grandkids are going to be absolutely blessed by your influence. And, as God brings you in touch with other cops, that you can actually speak to them and tell them, hey, there's healing after the service. And I think that's probably pretty cool
Absolutely.
too. I think that's probably
Yep.
you're specially qualified for certain things. And I just love that about you. So thanks for being with
Thank
us
you.
today.
You bet, Les.
And you want to know more about what I do and how you might benefit working with me, my website, clarifyfocus.com. There you can connect with me, free resources, and even buy my book, Purposeful Retirement, Making the Next Season of Life Your Best.